Hi, welcome to the Reboot Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. On today's show, I have Nick Lehman. He is a native of Washington State, a husband, a dad. He's also worked in the logistic and supply chain space for the past 12 years and has been a lifelong soccer player. So I would like to introduce Nick to the podcast. Hey, Nick, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about some wonderful world of layoff stuff.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, unfortunately, I found myself in that space just like many people over the last couple of years. I was laid off in early February of this year, so shorter than some, but definitely feeling the woes of job hunting and the difficulty that entails right now.
You said you've been in logistics and supply chain for about 12 years. What brought you here?
Yeah, I think I, like most people, sort of stumbled into warehousing and logistics. I didn't major in it. I didn't really know what it was or understand it until a job opportunity came up, and I started as a customer service representative, a regional third-party logistics provider. Thankfully, fell into it. I like solving puzzles, and that's sort of what logistics is. And so I worked my way up through that company for a few years, became a senior account manager, and was managing, our largest accounts at that particular location. And then from there, went on to work at a local startup and got in very, very early with them, spending about eight and a half years growing that company from 10 employees to upwards of 500 at peak. So sort of worn a variety of hats in the supply chain market, but sort of my last role was more around driving programs and cross-functional needs for the company, and really focused on how do we remove roadblocks and how do we move the company forward. That's sort of a very brief history of my 12 years in the industry.
I do like also the problem solving. That's really what kept me in that space for a long time. I've been in there for about 9 years and came over from healthcare.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe supply chain is that there's never a dull moment. There's always something to go solve. You never reach like total stable, I don't think, because there's just always something new to think about and some new innovation you need to think about working into your supply chain potentially.
Very true. Do you have a specific point in time throughout your career that stands out to you as being a really defining moment for you, or a really proud moment for you that you just kind of carry with you throughout all of your jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple. I mean, it's an industry where you have to celebrate the wins, because there are a lot of times where you just feel like you get kicked in the teeth a little bit. Plenty of things that I've sort of taken with me through my career. From the early days of my career. Running a full physical inventory on an entire building and getting a 99.9%. That's a feather in your cap that you sort of carry with you, and take the learnings from, like, what did we do to prepare for that, and why did it go so well? It's something that I've thought about every year when physical inventories come about with any customer I'm working with. And then certainly when I took the plunge and went to work for a very early stage startup, there were many moments where we had big learnings, which is a nice way of saying we failed hard. But what I really appreciated about all of those, especially in the early days, was that there was always a sense of, like, let's own the mistake. If we did it, let's fix it, and then let's make sure we don't do it again, and let's communicate proactively. And I think that mentality is sort of always how I've operated. I'm going to screw up. That's life. I'm a human being. There's no perfect supply chain, and I'm sure it's true in other realms of work as well, but certainly in supply chain, things are going to go wrong. I mean, there's no way around it.
I know a lot of times, especially in logistics, you can encounter client wants to do XYZ things that you've never seen or heard of before. So there's not really anything that you can model it after.
Yeah.
So you get in there and you're like, this might not work out very well. But knowing that full well that you're going to go in, make mistakes, but hit the ground running and learning from them, I think that is one of the best things you can do.
And heading into those situations, I think it's just so important to not overpromise, to be transparent about, like,
100%.
we're learning this together. We're going to iterate through some stuff. I think that's really important and probably something that sometimes gets forgotten because you want to overpromise, you want to sell the rosiest outcome, but I think it's often better for all parties if you can just set expectations up front that there's going to be a learning curve and we're going to work through it with the ultimate goal in mind of whatever that North Star is.
The customers that I've worked with, I found that the ones that we have been able to be upfront with have been the most understanding. And of course, there have been times where if we're upfront and they're like, okay, I can get better elsewhere, and they go elsewhere, guess what happens? They come back. I've I've seen them come back more times than not, and that says a lot. The honesty, the upfrontness, knowing that you are in this space that's just full of so many unknowns. It sounds like you really love logistics.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably find joy in other lines of work too. What I really enjoy is solving problems, and that's not unique to logistics or supply chain, but it is a very, my old boss used to say, opportunity rich environment. So supply chain is that. I mean, there's always, like we said earlier in the show, like there's always something to solve. There's always a new problem you have to look at, and so it lends itself well to the things that I do enjoy.
If you could go outside of logistics or just in any field, what would you want to do? Like, what is your dream?
Mm.
I mean, I would want to be like on a yacht somewhere sailing all over the seas and
I was gonna
everything, but
say,
you
uh,
know,
if we're taking early retirement off the table, if I was, in a dream scenario, if I could work for, like a nonprofit, charity type of company and still be able to pay the bills in a very expensive city in Seattle, that would be amazing. Those jobs are few and far between. So, but I would love to have the opportunity to take a lot of the skills I've learned through that and transfer it to a different line of work. If I could take a step out of, specific warehousing and third party logistics, I would like to do that, but that's certainly not opposed to, staying in my lane, so to speak, and doing the things that I've done. What's really nice about having worked at a startup for a long time is that I got to wear all those hats. I got to try things that I wouldn't have had at a bigger company. And so some of the skills that I've learned, certainly people management is transferable no matter where you go if you do it well, but some of the skills around, program management and cross-functional leadership, I think those are easily transferable to any company, really. The difficulty is selling it in your resume because
agreed.
it
Yes.
reads as very logistics heavy. And so if I go out and apply at companies that aren't, they may look at my resume and go, why is this guy even applying? He doesn't work in this area. So I think that's one of the challenges that I've definitely seen in this time of job hunting.
What I've seen a lot of in just my own experience from talking to others is the job postings that you have out there. It's almost like I feel like it's always been throughout history kind of a wish list of what companies are looking for, but I feel like with the change of the landscape of this market now, it's almost like if they say they want XYZ, they want XYZ. They don't want ZYX. Even though the skill might be transferable, if you haven't worked a particular software system, and you probably could replicate everything that's done in one into another, but
Yeah.
it's just really kind of this very rigid guidelines that they're following. And I found it very difficult to navigate through that because how do you take your transferable skills outside and grow?
Yeah.
Find a growth opportunity. So what type of struggles have you found with trying to look for in this market? Something that's not just cookie cutter to what you've done, but something that you know that you can do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's a buyer's market in the sense that every posting I've been seeing that's been up for more than a minute has over 100 applicants, and so it very much feels like you're sort of tossing your resume into a digital pile. So I think the biggest hurdle that certainly I've faced, and I feel like based on anecdotal stories from others, the biggest hurdle is getting past that initial screen, making it through the pile of digital resumes. I think that's the hardest part because the reality of recruiting and talent today is that most companies are probably using some sort of call it a bot, call it AI driven software, whatever you want to call it. They're using something to pre-screen all of these resumes, and they're looking for, a very specific Boolean search of keywords and phrases. And if you don't hit a certain number of those, you may very well be tossed out immediately. Even if they're not, if you have an actual recruitment team who's going through dozens, if not hundreds of resumes a week, you get a very limited amount of time in front of their eyes. And so I think the biggest hurdle that I've seen is that, yeah, there are a lot of jobs out there, but there are a lot more applicants going after these jobs. And I think what's tough is finding the balance between, customizing your resume and your cover letter and your application to the job, and getting your application in as many places as possible. Because the reality is that if you're up against 100 plus other people, your odds are pretty low. And so do you go for the sort of the scattershot approach and apply it a bunch of places, or do you really, really hone in on a couple and really tune up your paperwork to make it fit? But I think to the other part of your question, I think the transferable skills thing is a very real dilemma. If you can get in front of an interview panel or a hiring manager, you can talk through those things, and it can illuminate pretty clearly. But when it's reading off of a piece of paper, it's very hard to, transfer those skills to their line of work in real terms. And I think the other thing I'm facing is, if you're looking at, say, a director level role, almost every application wants you to have already been a director, but you have to, you've got to get that first stab somewhere. And that's true of any, like if you're going into your first management position, everyone wants you to have people management skills, but it's tough. You have to have that first opportunity. And I think, again, when you're in a buyer's market, that's really tough to surface, to the top 5 or 6 that will make it to that interview panel if you can't show that on your resume.
Going back to kind of like the job description, what I've seen a lot of is if I'm looking for a particular job title, it doesn't necessarily match the position. They're taking things like, okay, this is a project manager, but the list is basically saying that you need to have the ability to do coding. And it's like, no, those don't usually go hand in hand.
I think the other challenge with the job descriptions thing is that you hit the nail on the head when you said that it's a wish list for the company. And so you sort of feel that like imposter syndrome, where you're reading these qualifications and you think, okay, well, I only hit 8 out of the 10. I shouldn't even apply for this job. But it's really important to remember that a good company and a good, recruiting team will likely want to bring in diverse candidates, or they should want to bring in diverse candidates. And sometimes that means you're not a perfect fit. And that's something that I still struggle with. I'm saying it like I'm preaching it, but certainly it's something that I struggle with when I'm reading these descriptions. It's like, well, should I even apply because I don't meet all of the requirements or all the desired requirements? I think I lean more towards why not? What's the worst that can happen? You get another rejection email, but I think that is really tough for people who are in this position.
Being laid off, it's already kind of a jab at your self-esteem. So even if you had a little bit imposter syndrome prior to, it really brings all of that to the forefront and makes you have a lot of those self-doubt and fears come in that maybe you've conquered before, but they're starting to creep back in. Playing into that a little bit with being laid off, having to absorb all of these emotions and feelings. And I think you had mentioned before, this was your first layoff that you've experienced.
Yep, that's correct.
Being in a company for as long as you were, kind of seeing it grow from crawling baby to a running teenager, that's a lot of emotions to take on. So when you were given the news, what plan of action did you put into place for yourself to help keep your mental clarity about you and help you through that process?
Describing it as, a range of processing emotion is accurate. I described it as a spectrum of emotions. I mean, I feel like any big life event, I went through different stages. There was anger, there was disbelief, there was eventually you come to terms with it, but you sort of cycle through those things. Like, it's not like I was angry for a day, it went away, and then I was never angry again. You sort of think about things and it comes back. I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to have to move my family shortly after I was laid off. And I think that was ultimately a blessing because it was sort of a distraction. It allowed me to put my mind on something else. But diving back in, when we were moved and I had to really focus in on, okay, now it's time to find a job. It was difficult. First few rejection emails that came in fast. It was a wake up call. you think you have all this experience and you think you must be at least a decent candidate, and then you just start getting rejected. It does hurt. And I think you have to sort of come to terms with that. I think that's first and foremost, is you have to realize the reality of the job market, and sort of, this is going to be a slog. This is not going to be a silver bullet answer. For me, what really helped was sort of setting up a routine, similar to your workday. So, after I drop my family off in the morning, we're a one-car family. So after
Same here. Same here.
drop them off, I spend the next couple hours, usually 2 to 3, doing applications and networking and all of those things. Then I'm able to get, one of the benefits, I guess, of being unemployed is that I have more time to work out and take care of myself. So usually that's what follows, is, working out and sweating out the aggression, or the disbelief in yourself. But I think setting up a routine has helped. It certainly hasn't made rejection any easier. I don't think that still hurts, if I'm being honest, but it has helped, just sort of put my mind in the right place. That has really helped make this a little more palatable.
That sounds wonderful. I mean, keeping a routine, very important. I mean, as humans, we strive for that routine, talking to people. I think I mentioned to you before, one thing I miss about not working is not being able to talk to people on a daily basis outside of my family. They get sick of me. So I guess I gotta find more friends. I don't know. Or start a podcast, which I did. I know you had mentioned that you like the outdoors. Have you had any extra time to kind of do those activities outside, weather permitting?
Yeah, I was gonna say not yet, because I'm in Seattle, Washington, so we've had a nice string of days here where it's been 60s and 70s, but we're headed right back into the rain. So hopefully, my daughter just turned 4, so hopefully we'll be able to get outside this summer and do some hiking and stuff that we haven't really been able to do with her yet. I do want to touch on something you just said. Like, I think it's also really important for people to remember to give yourself a little grace. And that's something that admittedly I struggle with some days. When I first started this job hunting saga, we'll call it,
I like
I
it.
I was in it, 6+ hours a day, and sort of obsessively looking at job postings. And I think that wasn't healthy because it was just raising my stress level. And it was, realistically, if you read 50 job descriptions, they all start to sort of blend together in your head.
Yes.
So I think giving yourself a little bit of grace to realize, like, it's okay to take some time to exercise, or to get outside, or to do some of these other things. I've never been laid off, which I'm very fortunate, before this experience. But that also means I have free time now that I haven't had for a very long time, certainly during the week. Try to remind myself I'm far from perfect. And like I said, I sort of go through cycles, but trying to remind myself that it's okay to not be job hunting 8 hours a day. It's okay to sort of take some time to reboot your brain a little bit, and realize that doing some other things is equally important. Odds are, if I'm less stressed, I'm going to be more in tune with what I'm typing, and all the things I'm doing for job hunting anyway. So I think it's really important for people to keep that in mind.
That's great advice. I appreciate you saying that as well, because like you had touched on earlier, we kind of don't practice what we preach. I will tell anyone to apply for any job, like, go for it. But myself, I struggle with the imposter syndrome. And likewise, I'm a very tough critic for myself, but I'm over there giving everyone advice saying, take time, accept it, do all these things to make you happy. And I'm over there 8 hours, 9 hours a day, obsessively looking at job posts and driving myself crazy. So it's good to have someone else who's on the front line with you say that. It's a good reminder for myself. So I know it will help someone else.
Yeah. And I just feel like it has to be like part of your mantra, because I'm not, I go through phases. Some days are better than others. And you mentioned, at the top of the show, I played soccer most of my life, up until I got out of shape and turned into a dad. But
Happens. It
I'm
happens.
a very competitive person. And so I sort of have to remind myself to take a step back, take a deep breath, focus on, mental health as much as anything else throughout all of this. Because, I've used the word slog a couple of times for the job hunt. It really is, it's draining. And I think being transparent about what it is and how hard it is important, because that will allow you sort of that freedom to give yourself some grace, like I said earlier. Be kind to yourself, because there is rejection, and it is gonna sting a little bit. So you have to sort of prep yourself for the longer haul here, or not. Maybe some people will get really lucky, and I applaud them for that. But for most of us, I think it's a difficult road.
I can say for myself, it's been difficult. It's been a very eye-opening, and I've had to do a lot of introspection and just thinking about, what am I doing? Which direction am I going in?
Yeah.
Like I had mentioned previously, I have no idea, but we're working on it. I mean, it's a work in progress. So that's why I call this the reboot loading, because I'm loading. I'm still in process. It's not loaded yet. So we're working on it. I think it's important to have some things in place that keep you grounded. I'm glad that you have those in place. I'm just curious to learn about your firefighting training. And
Yeah.
so prior to logistics, you had trained as a firefighter.
It
How was
did,
that?
yeah. It was great. Before I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. That's kind of I guess you could call me a headstrong 17-year-old, because I didn't turn 18 till what would be my freshman year of college. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I had always, like most people, respected firefighters and really amazed by what they do. So I went and did some firefighting training in a town called Yakima in Washington, and took some community college courses while I did that. But pretty quickly found through the testing process for firefighting that at the time everyone wanted to be a firefighter, and I would go to an open test for two positions, and there'd be hundreds of people there to test, and so it just sort of felt like I was spinning my wheels. And again, didn't know what I wanted to do at that age, and so I made the decision to go to a 4-year university, and decided, through that process and through learning about, myself and future careers, that I didn't necessarily want to pursue that anymore. But loved every minute of it. It was exciting. It was fun. It was rewarding. So I still respect the hell out of firefighters and everything they do.
I think it's great you took that chance though, because one thing that when I was 17, I had no idea where my life would be, at the age I am now, which is way older. But I feel like at the age of 17, 18, even by the time most people graduate from a 4-year university, you really don't know what you want to do. It does evolve. So I like how you mentioned, it evolves over time, and you have the opportunity to kind of learn what you don't want, what you do want. That's good. I mean, I think it's a great experience that you had. I'm sure it was very labor intensive through that training though.
It was, yeah. I mean, thankfully back then I was in much better shape, having played soccer, my entire life. But yeah, it was physically, mentally. I mean, it was a good thing for me. Not quite on the level of military discipline, but definitely you had a very set routine. You had to do things in a set cadence while you were a trainee, and so I think it was a good experience for me just in general, to sort of get my head right as a young adult, and figure out what I wanted to do, even if it wasn't what I was doing. And I ended up, going to a university and loving my time there, and it sort of changed my trajectory in life.
That's great to hear about. I like that story. It's always interesting to hear where people ended up. For someone who's out there right now looking at a job, and they're out there maybe laid off, maybe they're just looking for a change, or whatever their case might be, what is your best advice that you have from your experience so far that you have to give?
I would say don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone and reach out to anyone that you know who's at a company that has, any interest. I think I tend to be the type of person to like put my head down and I'm going to do it myself sometimes. But that's the opposite of what I would tell other people. So I have to sort of check myself. But networking is huge, reaching out to anybody, whether they're a hiring manager or not, and just saying, hey, here's the situation I'm in, being transparent. Here's where I'm at. If you know of anything, if you know someone, like, I'm happy to send my resume. I think anytime you have even a tangential in somewhere, it's better than, throwing your resume into the pile of hundreds or more. And so I think that the best piece of advice I can give is don't be afraid to reach out to people, sort of break out of that, I need to do this myself. and sort of acknowledge that there are people out there who are more than willing to help. Even if it's just, forwarding on your resume, you never know where it's going to land. That's the biggest piece of advice I can give, because right now there's dozens or more applicants for just about every position. So whatever you can do to sort of set yourself apart and get yourself to that interview stage where you can talk to someone and you can be face to face, even if it's over a Zoom screen. I think that's really, really important for people to realize.
That's great advice. I like it. And it's kind of leading me into my next question that popped up, is kind of running along those same lines of giving that advice out to people who are in this same sort of situation. What are some of the small things that someone could do just to kind of support you in this situation?
That's a great question. I think the easiest answer is sort of dovetailing off of the last, which is, if you can not just accept, someone who reaches out to you and understand where they're coming from, but really, even if you send that resume to two people that that are hiring or maybe hiring in that particular avenue where someone might be qualified for, I think it's easy to think that that's being like passively helpful, but I think it helps a lot more than people realize. So I think it may seem like, you're just forwarding a piece of paper around, a digital piece of paper, but I think it's more helpful than people realize. Certainly a more active approach is if you have a pretty diverse and connected network on, LinkedIn or social media, if you want to vouch for somebody and you feel comfortable that their work ethic and whatnot, do a post about them. Put this person out there as, this is someone I worked with, or this is someone I know, they're amazing. Here's the things they're good at. I think those, if you feel comfortable doing that, that's amazing. I've seen that help people already in sort of the layoffs that my company experienced. So there's a lot of ways to help, and honestly, just reaching out, I think, is another thing people can do that, again, seems like it's nothing, but the outpouring of support that I got when I was laid off from people I didn't even know, had never talked to in person, it helped me get through those darkest few days, where things were really tough and you were sort of battling through that spectrum of emotions. So I think those are really easy ways. None of those is a high lift. None of those require a huge amount of effort on your part, but it really does help.
I like that you said about somebody just reaching out and saying something, because I think it goes a long way with acknowledging the struggle that someone's going through. So whether it be a loss of a job, just anything that they could be going through a grieving process for, having that acknowledged, it really does go a long way. And some of the things that I've seen as well, like you mentioned about the, reposting about that person, if they're putting a post out there saying, hey, they're looking for something, do a simple repost, and that can go a long way. It just reaches a larger audience. In reality, this is all kind of like a numbers game with as many resumes you have to get out there, just as much as you have to kind of push yourself out there in front of as many people as possible, just to find that one, because that's all it takes. You just need one.
Yeah.
Just simple likes on posts that they post on LinkedIn. It will push content out to other people. Other people will see it in their feeds.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to have those low lift ways to help, right? Because it can be hard if you are gainfully employed, which is great, to take that time to do something more broad. But really, the things we're talking about take seconds, and they can be really impactful to people. So would definitely encourage people to do whatever they can within their own professional networks to help others, because the more people can help each other, the better.
I agree with that. Well, Nick, I want to say that I have had an absolute wonderful time speaking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about kind of the struggles that you've gone through, talk about your experience. Just in the short time I've spoken with you, I could tell that you have a very keen sense of problem solving. It's very evident. You're very easy to talk with. I think that any company that comes your way that's wanting to hire you is going to have a very great employee on their hands that can really make a difference for them. And last but not least, I just wanted to ask you, once you have secured your next employment opportunity, would you be interested in doing a follow-up show with me and just kind of talk about everything that happened from now until then, and kind of what your experience is like now being back into the working world?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And before, I'd be remiss to not say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and for having this conversation. I think it's it's just another way of sort of, in a healthy way, venting out the frustrations of what this process is like. So it's been a pleasure talking to you as well. And 100% would love to come back on and share a success story that I hope is not too far in the future.
That sounds wonderful. And for anyone looking for contact info on Nick, I will have that linked in the show notes to his LinkedIn profile, and you can get in touch with him. Check out his credentials. You will not be disappointed. If you're interested in becoming a guest on my show, all the information on how to contact me is available in the show notes. Would love to speak with other laid-off individuals, mental health professionals, recruiters, business and career coaches, and resume writers. Also, if you're enjoying the content and would like a shout out in an upcoming episode, a link in how you can support this podcast is available in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.